Well, good afternoon, and thank you for coming. First off, I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that the presentation or workshop has very little to do with the official title of Centralizing IoT Devices. The good news is the title was crap, so what you're going to get is a real presentation. I don't know what the difference is between a workshop and a presentation, so I'm expecting that you have questions. Just interrupt me and ask. It'll be more interesting this way. I also haven't really curated it for time, so it may be much shorter than expected. That's the agenda, right? So I'm going to describe what is I'm talking about. I'll introduce Kyndryl because the question I've heard most often since I've been here is, who is Kyndryl? And we've had a vote internally today, and after today, we're not going to answer that question anymore. I'm going to talk about what we think is our vision for a connected industrial environment. Zero trust, because nowadays everything has to consider zero trust. Right? You can't build a network if it isn't secure because you might as well just give your credentials to the bad guys. Then I'm going to go into case studies, a connectivity and segmentation case study, an automation case study, and finally security and visibility. And then just some final words, and you guys will be free. So what are islands of automation? I read an essay last year, and it struck me, the concluding sentence I thought was really on. It was by a lady named Ellen Ullman, and it basically ended with, we built our computers like we built our cities over time, piece by piece, and on top of ruins. And I think that can apply to most of the shop floors we know in the world today. I have customers that have walked their environments, and I see lathe machines from the late 70s still working. So I have other customers that control systems are running Windows NT. I think on top of ruins is a very apropos statement. So islands of automation are locations where we have multiple domains. You would have a lathe machine here controlled by a PLC that is old. You would have an arc furnace here, which is top of the line, brand new, driven by the latest server. And then you go over here and you'd have a manually controlled automated storage system, or not so automated. And that is very common. Again, you have multiple types of devices, which means that you have to have staff that knows how to support these multiple types of devices, right? It also means that you're open to cyber tampering, because a lot of these environments can't be protected. You can't harden Windows NT, I'm sorry, no matter how much you try. And if your Windows NT controller implementation puts at risk your brand new arc furnace implementation, then you have a problem. Updates, well, what are updates? I've seen people running around with USB drives or even old floppies or USB storage, right, and bringing updates to the devices. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm not going to take it personally. Half of you get up and leave. If not, I'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. So what is Kyndryl? At heart, we're a technology services company, right? We've been in business for about a year and a bit, but we have $20 billion in sales and 90,000 plus employees, 4,000 plus customers, 75 of Fortune 100s are our customers. And I'm saying all this without saying who we used to be before, right? We are very heavily into innovation. That's my job. The title you saw on the screen before has actually changed on the weekend. I'm called the Director of Network and Edge in Canada. I'm not sure what I direct yet, but it still happens that it's a network and edge. My day job is finding new ways to support our customers get the outcome they're looking for. And that outcome usually needs to be secure. That outcome needs to be effective, cost effective. But I am a network guy at heart. I'm not an industrial processes guy. I'm not a manufacturing guy. I've been a CCIE for 26 years. So, if you cut me, it'll probably bleed Cisco blue. But Kyndryl is partner agnostic. We will partner with the best company to fit our solution. That's one of the things that we've achieved since we become independent. We no longer have to go to a particular cloud company. We will deal with Azure, we'll deal with AWS. We will find the best solution for our customers. So what is our vision for industrial connectivity? The first thing is it has to be seamless. You shouldn't have to worry about where your data is coming on an LTE connection, whether your data is coming on Wi-Fi, if your sensor is sitting on a LoRaWAN. It shouldn't make a difference to you. It shouldn't make a difference to your system. Data is data. So that data has to come in. It is correlated, and it has to be acted upon, right? So if we're talking about industrial data, we're talking about Industry 4.0. It should be acted at the edge. Most things may not need the 10 millisecond response time. I mean, if I'm sending predictive maintenance telemetry, you can afford to go back to the data center and be processed and come back. But if you have a pipeline that's beginning to lose oil, you may want to close that gate rather sooner instead of later, right? So that's why everything needs to be processed, and you need a compute resource to decide, this I do now, this I send to corporate. I have a number of customers that are mining customers, that are oil and gas. They're in the middle of nowhere. We've now signed agreements with 2 more agreements coming up of low Earth orbit satellite companies and 1 medium Earth orbit satellite. So we can provide you managed services to your location, doesn't matter where in the world it is. We'll put an antenna, we'll put a router in there, and we'll get the data out to you. Whether you want it in a corporate or you want to go to the internet, we will fix that for you. One of the things that our agreement allows us to do is, if you do have an oil and gas exploration team or a mining exploration team or a forestry exploration team, and you have people in the middle of nowhere, some of the data is corporate, but you can also then turn around and add a Wi-Fi connectivity and then provide your employees with connections to home. One last thing, but is rather key, is that everything we build has to be secure, right? Security and visibility today is key. You must be getting the newsletters from NIST, right? In Canada, I get them from our equivalent, which is Security and Exchanges Establishment. The CISAs as well, which basically says the threat of cybersecurity tampering this year is 3 times as high as it was last year, which was 3 times higher than the year before. So anything you do, you need to include visibility, you need to include security. At a lower level, this is what I'm talking about for retrofitting an older environment, right? I actually built this schematic for a steel mill in northern Canada. So what we're looking at discrete cell environments where they may have a Windows NT controller, where they may have a Windows XP controller. We add a commodity device in front of it that acts as 2 things. It terminates the industrial environment, gathers the telemetry, right? Sends that telemetry to our security systems, our analysis systems. On the other side of the link, it is an IP device. It is an intelligent secure IP device, so it is verifying authentication. Do you have the authority and the privileges to talk to this PLC, right? It is verifying protocol connectivity, and it is providing QoS control and whatever else is necessary on the IP side of the connection. Again, if you look at the screen, you'll see that I've got telemetry points all over the map, and that's exactly what we need to do. The other thing you will see is that it's irrelevant to me or to my customer whether I'm wired using Wi-Fi, LTE connectivity, or an amalgamation of Wi-Fi and LTE devices, right? So for example, if I was in a windmill farm, and I actually did some work for a customer in Spain on that, you would put your sensors on the individual windmills, right? And then you would bring all the data back to a centralized location, you'd manage it, process it, and send it back home. Any questions? As long as you're not throwing tomatoes, I'm good. So, zero trust. Going back to what I said many times, I'm a network guy. If you bring a security guy here, and I've had many conversations and they get agitated with our security teams at Kyndryl, from a network point of view, zero trust goes down to 4 pillars: authentication, segmentation, automation, and visibility. Authentication, we need to know who you are, we need to know who you're talking to, and we need to know that you have the privileges to talk to that device. And why should your corporation manage 3 or 4 separate authentication or credential systems, right? Because your PLC over here can only understand something, and that understands something else, and your corporate system is using Microsoft. So it needs to be a single authentication domain that is integrated and it's used across your enterprise. So segmentation. Well, segmentation does 2 things. By breaking down the network into smaller portions, what I do is I create a gate at the entrance to every portion that allows me to verify that authentication, right? So by having multiple segments, I can actually check at every step of the way that this data packet can validly go from A to Z. The second thing it does, and we all make mistakes and the bad guys get better every minute, is that when I am compromised, I'm compromised in a much smaller segment. I'm not compromised on an entire shop floor. I'm not even compromised on an entire segment. I just compromised one PLC, right? And the moment that PLC starts sending out ARPs and trying to do discovery, I'm going to catch it, I'm going to shut it down. Automation. The biggest thing about automation is eliminating human error. I have showed up at a customer site where I've been chief architect or lead architect or whatever, and my credentials didn't arrive for 3 weeks. So I basically sat there playing solitaire for a while or reading text on the internet. I could not get on the corporate network. But at the same token, when I left that project, my user ID was still valid for months. We need to eliminate those human errors. I've seen cases of people where their credentials were not correctly set up, and at some point the guy handling it bleep it and just gave him all access. Again, we need to eliminate those human errors. Automation does those things. Automation also allows us to react in a much quicker manner. About 10 years ago, I did an audit for a very large carrier in Canada. We're not going to name them, but there aren't that many. And as part of the audit, I'm going through their security procedures and talking to their network operations team. So what do you do if you get a DDoS? Oh, we call the level 3 on call. Okay. What do you do if you get a port scan? We call the level 3 on call. What if you do get this? We call the level 3 on call. You getting the drift? Their only procedure was they called the level 3 on call. So if you start being attacked or somebody's taking over part of your network, and then, the NOC realizes this, or the SOC realizes this, they pick up the phone and they wake up somebody up, and this person gets cobwebs off their face, and they get to a terminal. How much exposure have you had? We need to start reacting on these things in real time. It needs to happen on edge compute, which is why automation is one of the keys, right? The moment you see packets that don't belong there, the moment you see activity that doesn't belong there, it should trigger whatever visibility software you have, which is the next column, to send an API to your security software to say you're going to quarantine this side, right? Again, automation is key, and it's, this is not a revelation, it's motherhood and apple pie. It's what needs to happen. So the last one is visibility. I once had a boss tell me that if he didn't know what I was doing, I wasn't doing it. Sadly, on an industrial environment, it's the reverse. If you don't know what's happening, it is happening, right? You need to understand the traffic inside your network, whether it be industrial or IT, right? You need to be able to verify what is happening, just to do baseline analysis, just to see if you need to upgrade and get more access points or switch to an LTE or start putting more switches. If you don't have visibility as to what's going on, you really don't understand how the infrastructure may be hampering your industrial processes, right? You don't understand whether you can be more efficient, whether you can save money, whether you can deliver your product in half the time. So looking at the use cases, this is that particular steel mill that I was talking about. And so I flew up to Northern Canada, had a great experience flying on Porter Airlines in a propeller airplane. It's great. And we get there and we're talking to the people managing the data center, managing the network, and we walk around the steel mill. And like I said, some of the PLCs, the controller was sitting on a Windows NT machine. Some were even older. I didn't dare ask, right? There were Ethernet cards. There were cables dangling all over the place. And their key thing is, well, we're getting a brand new arc furnace next month and it's top of the line. And we want to make sure that we got bandwidth on the network to accommodate it. And I'm saying, yeah, you have bandwidth on your network, but how's your network? Oh, it's all layer 2. It's all in the same VLAN. It's all layer 2. These guys are all in the same subnet. So if I compromise one of your old devices, I can get to any part of the network. Well, yeah. So this is the solution that we came up. Again, it's a little commodity firewall that we put in front of their PLCs, at every PLC. And it's a small manufacturer. You know, they would not have been able to afford a millions of dollars implementation. So it had to be something that was economical but effective. The little firewall handled the IP side, it handled the authentication, and it was able to communicate pretending to be a layer 2 device to the PLC. We created a proof of concept with them for visibility, and they were able to get data. They were able to start connecting their information systems in to understand what their manufacturing was doing and run some of the applications that they were doing manually at the time. We did not get the edge compute up at the time, and we're still negotiating with the customer to actually finish the implementation. Any questions so far? Yeah, sure.
Can you say a little more about how you balance authentication and segmentation? Because you're talking about having one authentication domain for the whole enterprise.
Right.
That includes control systems and everything?
The process is to start creating authentication for your control systems in Microsoft, right? So that when the data goes through the checkpoints, it can actually go back to the AD and verify that this is valid data.
So that on my site, our PCS are running on Windows as well. They have their own domains. So if we were to do this,
You would have to put your domain sub to the master corporate domain, right? So they could go and interrogate the corporate domain and verify whether this is a valid user or not.
if I was signing into PCS remotely, then re-enter my password
There are things. There is federation that you can do, right? So it is an integration project, but you do end up with a single sign-on federated system.
Next is IoT. I'm wondering if that compromises segmentation in some way.
I don't think so. I think that the moment that you have multiple authentication domains, you're going to start getting yourself into trouble.
I know that has its own problem.
I would recommend, there are white papers out there that have actually been tax leveraged. There's a good reason to have separate domains with 2 environments. Go do some research. But there are also means by which you can exchange tokens that you can build layers upon. Does a user in this domain need to have credential token from the other domain without having full federation, full inherited trust? So, and that's part of some road we've still got to pave ahead on zero trust architecture, because All those technologies aren't there yet.
You are right. You're right, but we do have to start somewhere. We do say that zero trust is a journey, and also that every customer is different, right? I'm talking about generalized use cases. It doesn't mean that this is going to fit every customer. It doesn't mean it's going to fit you. It's just this is what we had to do at the time.
So what the target level for the SL that you have, SL2, SL1, SL3?
Sorry, could you
What was
repeat?
the target SL level? If you follow 443, right, standard, I mean then you have an SL level, right? SL2, SL3, based on what kind of level were they targeting for their security level, for their industrial infrastructure?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer right now.
Because in the end, in the future, every device will be its own microsegment, and with software SDN, you connect stuff, right? With smart
And
stuff.
that-
But
that
that is a few years out.
Right, that is the intent.
Yeah.
That is intent. I should have brought my security guy as well, and then we could have answered your question. The second use case, this is something that we're talking to a Canadian gold mine. We had a meeting 3 weeks ago, and basically they're about to build a new site in the third world, and they have a problem. Is that when they're in an area where there could be some very noxious gases around, and they need to be able to detect when the air is no longer safe and automatically activate fans. But they also need to know whether there's people around there so they can get them out. So originally I was going to do this in my lab. The problem I have is Kyndryl is in the process of rationalizing our buildings. My lab was in one of the buildings that is going to be moved out. So I no longer have a lab. I had to I went to Cisco. Cisco provided me access to their lab. I went to Juniper. They provided me access to their lab. And I have some equipment in my basement. But in the end, I ended up doing most of this on the Cisco and Juniper labs. And again, this is a lab demonstration that could have had a bigger implication. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to have a sensor that when it detected an alarm, it would send a signal to the management station, an API through MQTT, would then activate another application to run the geolocation. And then the geolocation application, if there was users nearby, would set up an alarms and emails and so on. So that's the equipment I had in the lab. As I said, I did most of it at the Cisco lab. So we had a Cisco core, Cisco LoRaWAN sensors, LoRaWAN gateway, IoT devices. And then from Juniper, I had a Juniper Mist and their BLE-enabled user ID cards. And that's an IC3000 ended up in my basement. I ended up not using it for the demo. But it's a great toy. So we have the sensors, we baseline them, create the alarm. We simulated MQTT by receiving the email. When we got the email, we knew that we had triggered an alarm and we took action. Then we triggered a missed geolocation. I detected that there was a BLE-enabled badge within the secure zone, and it enabled an alarm. So in the in the Cisco IT dashboard, you can see that we alarmed. This is the missed geolocation. The area on the left where I have the red triangle, that'd be the area I want to protect. And you see that I've moved the BLE into that area. And this is what happened. Wait for it. There we go. In real life, if it hadn't been a simple lab that I was running on a weekend, that would have triggered multiple things. So fans would have come on, as we mentioned before. Emails would have been sent out to this person saying, get the hell out of there. And a nice, rotating red light would have come on the area saying, this area is now dangerous.
How do you be sure that is in line with safety regulations? Because that's a line, that's an abstract thing. Is that? In our minds, we have minds as well. We can't play around like that. We have to use MSHA-approved systems to do stuff like that, right?
So this is a demo that we created
Because
for
demo, yeah,
our
because it's
customer.
hobby,
And what we wanted to show the customer is that what they asked for was doable
yeah.
and that we could deliver it. Right?
Dominic, were you asking about hazardous area location? So there is hazardous area LoRaWAN equipment available.
Yes.
Because I've done it on offshore platforms and we've done it in hazardous facilities. So, and LoRaWAN has some advantages and benefits and capabilities really good, especially around the idea of geolocation. Locating assets without having to have GPS reception everywhere and things like that on a multi-level offshore. But there are a few providers that package LoRaWAN with hazardous area classification ratings.
You're correct. Again, I used the thermometer sensor because I couldn't get a hold of one of those within any reasonable time. The application is the same. Sensor trips, generates an alarm. The alarm is classified as a major alarm, then we take action. Right? On the miss side is that we've defined some zones as proximity zones and we define some zones as location zones. So in proximity zones, if you're near the zone, we trigger the APIs. Location zones, you have to be within the protected zone for us to trigger the APIs. One of the other things I wanted to try, I just never got enough time in the lab, is I wanted to automatically lock or unlock doors. Again, it's all doable with the right API, but the concept is you have a hazardous environment, somebody's nearby, you alarm it, you email them, and you could open the door or lighting or whichever systems. The last use case is about visibility. And we have a demo system based on Cisco CyberVision. And I'm not going to get into the discussion whether CyberVision, Dragos. CyberVision is a commodity product. I totally agree. But if you don't have anything, it is better than not knowing what is going on the floor. And it gives you some very interesting insights. So this is the dashboard. We can see the devices. We can see how many vulnerabilities the devices have. We can see the number of events. We can see alarms. It's the second page of the dashboard where we actually list all the devices. CyberVision also gives you a map mode, and it gives you a Purdue model mode. The problem with the Purdue model is that it's very vertical, and I couldn't shrink it enough to get a good screen capture, which is why it's not on the presentation. But that's a map mode. You can click on a PLC, you can click on a network device, you can then see the status, you can see the vulnerabilities, you can see what that device is doing. So this is a view of an inventory screen. Again, we're looking at devices, tells you what the device is, the MAC address, and so on. But then you can drill down on the device, look at vulnerabilities, look at risk scores. That's a risk score overview for a particular PLC. We can see the activity of the device. So we can see what the device has been talking to, who's been talking to it, and what the commands are. And if there is any data that doesn't look normal, then we highlight it, or the device highlights it. Right? Again, looking at the flows, we can ensure that the flows are appropriate, and if not, we can take action on it. We also have security insights, which is by, again, analyzing the flows, determining whether it's valid or not. Last but not least, another of Kyndryl's partners actually goes beyond what CyberVision does, and that's automatic remediation of problems. This is a software called Phosphorus. They're one of our partners. So while CyberVision is looking at the network side of things and is looking at network traffic and is looking at what it is happening on the network as an entity, Phosphorus is looking at the PLCs, analyzing the revision level of the PLCs, analyzing the credentials of the PLCs, and besides noting that there is a problem with it, phosphorus can actually take active remediation if you allow it to. So if telnet is enabled, it will shut it down. If SSH is enabled, it will shut it down or not, depending on you. If the password is admin, and 90% of the time it is, it will change it. Then if there is any firmware vulnerabilities and there is an update available, Phosphorus will update the PLC based on the schedule, based on when it's allowed to do it. And as I said, I don't know what time it is. Wow, only 30 minutes. This is the end. If you have any more questions. Crickets.
Any question, folks?
Hello. I just wanted to comment, James, rather than do a question. Is that I'd like to be able to answer the SL question or the target level question relative
Please
to
do.
IEC 62443. So IEC 62443 describes zones and conduits, and from a zone perspective, you would take your devices and break them up into those zones, and then at that point you would put and assign a target level from 0 to 4. So 0 being no security to 4 being the highest level of security that you potentially put in place. And then a conduit is allowed or disallowed communication between those zones, so that the audience understands exactly what the question was. And the question was, what target level did the system have? I know nothing about this system, so I won't talk about the target level. But when you start to deploy segmentation and microsegmentation, what you're doing is naturally zoning the environment. And if you're actually microsegmenting, what you're doing is host segmenting. And so at that point, you would make a target level security from 0 to 4 based off the host rather than the group of devices, because now it's a host-based security in comparison to a zoned-based security. If you are just simply doing natural segmentation where you're segmenting based off of VLANs, then at that point you're going to make a choice based off of the types of devices that you're grouping together, and then at that point make a target level choice and doing that. And then I want to go to the domain kind of thing that was discussed. This is that I agree with the audience from the perspective of bringing the domains together from an IT and OT perspective is a substantial security risk. And the reason why it's a risk is that if the domain is compromised on the IT side, then at that point the OT domain is immediately compromised, and then at that point your crown jewels of physical operations are open to risk. So how do you solve that problem? You solve that problem with two different solutions. One is don't join the domains. The other is if you do join the domains, then at that point use privileged access management security solutions to be able to protect your domain controllers. So you have really two choices. One is a technical choice where you're putting in products to be able to solve the security risk, or the other is simply keeping the domains separated from each other, and then at that point re-authenticating users as they move from one domain, the IT domain, into the OT domain. And with that, I think that you'll end up being more secure if you don't join the domains. But that being said, these technologies for privileged access management security solutions, I'm sure, actually, there's nobody here that does privileged access management to my knowledge, but CyberArk would be an example of one of them with those vendors that could protect the domain from being compromised or being recognized when it's being compromised. In the end, is that security is really about authentication and user knowledge, and you need to be able to protect your domain and your domain controllers as best as you possibly can. So, sorry, James, not asking a question. I'd be like, who are the customers? But I don't know what else to ask. So I'll just
That's
leave.
fine. And in fact, when you were still at your previous employer, we did talk about the customer.
Oh, okay, good, perfect. I know exactly who you're talking about, but I love the presentation and the hazardous pieces in what you're doing with the HazOps side of the equation is very intriguing, because really I think what we're seeing in the industry is bringing together cyber and physical together to be able to deal with cyber physical security, and it's very intriguing presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. You have a point. I think that there are, and again, it varies from customer to customer. right? There are cases to be made for joining the domains because of staff control, because of cost control, whichever. But whenever integrating your IT and OT systems, it is a complicated endeavor, can't be taken lightly, because actually risk goes both ways, right? In a Florida water plant, it was actually the OT side that was attacked and infected the IT side. So it goes both ways, but whenever you do this, there is a synergy and there is an efficiency you can gain from doing it. I personally think it's worthwhile. It just needs to be done well, right? It's not a project you're going to deliver for next month. It has to be properly planned. And I had forgotten, I had the last slide, and this is the Kyndryl ecosystem. This is our list of partners that we currently have major agreements with. And some of them are even nearly exclusive, right? But again, any questions, feel free to pass by our booth or email me or the team. Thank you for your time.